Ever wonder which stars said no to legendary roles, and instantly regretted it? Will Smith turned down Neo in The Matrix, Sean Connery passed on Gandalf in The Lord of the Rings, and Tom Selleck missed being Indiana Jones. Al Pacino rejected Han Solo, Emily Blunt lost Black Widow due to scheduling, and John Travolta passed on Forrest Gump. Even Madonna skipped Catwoman. All later admitted they underestimated how iconic those roles would become. Did you know Will Smith was originally offered the role of Neo in The Matrix? At the time, the pitch by the Wachowskis seemed too unconventional for him. Smith admitted he didn't fully grasp the concept. They described slow-motion action and camera rotations, which sounded bizarre before bullet-time visuals were mainstream. Instead, he chose to star in Wild Wild West, a film that turned out to be both a critical and commercial disappointment. In hindsight, Smith has openly expressed regret, saying he wasn't smart enough to understand the brilliance of The Matrix. He has since praised Keanu Reeves for perfectly embodying Neo and making the role iconic. While Smith's career remained successful, missing out on one of the most groundbreaking sci-fi roles in cinema history still stings a little, especially knowing how massively influential The Matrix became. Sometimes, saying no at the wrong moment can define a what if forever. Sean Connery was offered the iconic role of Gandalf in the Lord of the Rings trilogy but famously turned it down, and it's a decision he later regretted. At the time, Connery reportedly didn't fully understand the script or the story's scope. The fantasy epic was still somewhat unfamiliar territory, and he passed on the role, missing out on what became one of the biggest film franchises ever. What made the decision even more surprising was the generous offer he received, a profit-sharing deal that could have earned him more than $400 million as the films became blockbuster hits worldwide. Instead, the role went to Ian McKellen, whose portrayal became legendary and cemented Gandalf as one of cinema's most beloved characters. Connery later admitted that turning down Gandalf was a huge missed opportunity. Although he was already an established star, he acknowledged that the cultural impact and financial success of the Lord of the Rings trilogy were something special, and he simply didn't recognize it at the time. Tom Selleck was originally offered the role of Indiana Jones in Raiders of the Lost Ark, a character that would go on to become one of the most iconic in film history. However, Selleck had to turn down the opportunity because he was contractually obligated to star in the hit TV show Magnum, P.I. This scheduling conflict meant he couldn't accept the role, despite being interested. The decision wasn't personal but purely professional, tied to existing commitments. Still, Selleck later admitted he deeply regretted missing out on playing Indiana Jones. He recognized how monumental the role became for Harrison Ford, helping to define Ford's career and cementing the franchise's legendary status. In interviews, Selleck expressed that while Magnum, P.I. was a great show, he sometimes wonders how different his career might have been if he'd been able to take the Indiana Jones role. Ford's portrayal captured the perfect blend of adventure, charm, and toughness that made the character unforgettable. This is a classic example of how timing and contractual obligations can impact career-defining moments, leaving even talented actors with what-if moments in their careers. Emily Blunt was originally cast as Natasha Romanoff, aka Black Widow, in the Marvel Cinematic Universe, long before Scarlett Johansson made the role iconic. However, due to contractual obligations and scheduling conflicts with Gulliver's Travels, 2010, Blunt had to turn down the role. At the time, Gulliver's Travels seemed like a safe studio project, but it ended up being critically panned and commercially underwhelming. While Blunt has maintained professionalism about the missed opportunity, there's no doubt that the role of Black Widow went on to become one of the most significant female superhero roles in modern cinema. Johansson played the character across nearly a dozen MCU films, culminating in a standalone movie and massive box office success. Blunt has since acknowledged the frustration that came with being unable to take on the role but doesn't openly dwell on regret. Still, fans and industry insiders often point to this as one of the biggest what-ifs in casting history. Considering the cultural impact and longevity of the Marvel franchise, it's hard not to see this as a major missed opportunity, both creatively and financially, for the actress. Despite that, Blunt has continued to enjoy a successful and varied career. Matt Damon famously turned down the lead role of Jake Sully in James Cameron's Avatar, 2009, a decision he later described as the dumbest thing an actor ever did. At the time, Damon was deeply committed to the Bourne Ultimatum and couldn't fit Avatar into his schedule. What makes the missed opportunity even more painful is that Cameron offered him not just the role, but also 10% of the film's profits. Avatar went on to become the highest-grossing film of all time, earning nearly $3 billion worldwide. Had Damon accepted the offer, he could have made over $250 million from the back-end deal alone, more than most actors earn in a lifetime. The role eventually went to Sam Worthington, who was relatively unknown at the time. Though Damon has joked about the mistake in interviews, there's a clear sense that he recognizes how massive the opportunity was, both financially and culturally. Despite this, Damon's career has remained successful, with major roles in critically acclaimed films. Still, missing out on Avatar remains one of Hollywood's most talked about casting decisions and a cautionary tale about turning down roles that seem too ambitious or unconventional at first glance. Al Pacino was once offered the role of Han Solo in Star Wars, 1977, a part that ultimately went to Harrison Ford and became one of the most iconic characters in film history. At the time, Pacino was riding high on the success of The Godfather and had his pick of roles. However, when presented with George Lucas's sci-fi script, Pacino admitted he didn't understand it and passed on the opportunity. Looking back, Pacino has often joked about turning down Star Wars, calling it a missed opportunity, and humorously referring to himself as the guy who gave Harrison Ford a career. While said in jest, it's clear he recognizes the magnitude of what he turned down. Han Solo became a cultural phenomenon, and the Star Wars franchise grew into one of the most successful and beloved in cinema history. Despite this, Pacino's career remained legendary in its own right, filled with award-winning performances and unforgettable roles. Still, the idea of Al Pacino as the wisecracking, blaster-wielding smuggler remains one of Hollywood's great what-ifs. His decision to pass on Star Wars is a classic example of how even the most seasoned actors can misjudge a script that goes on to change film forever. John Travolta was originally offered the role of Forrest in Forrest Gump, 1994, but he turned it down in favor of starring in Quentin Tarantino's Pulp Fiction. At the time, Travolta's career was in a slump, and he likely saw Pulp Fiction as a bold, edgy project that could reignite his fame, which it did. However, passing on Forrest Gump turned out to be one of his biggest career regrets. The role eventually went to Tom Hanks, who delivered a performance that earned him an Academy Award for Best Actor. The film itself became a cultural landmark, praised for its emotional depth, storytelling, and historical resonance. It won 6 Oscars and grossed over $678 million worldwide. Travolta later admitted that turning down Forrest Gump was a mistake, though he doesn't dwell on it negatively. Ironically, both Pulp Fiction and Forrest Gump were nominated for Best Picture that year, with Gump taking the top prize. While Pulp Fiction revived Travolta's career and earned him an Oscar nomination, Forrest Gump became one of the most beloved films of all time. The missed opportunity remains a significant what-if in film history, a reminder of how one choice can shape an entire legacy. Gwyneth Paltrow was one of the top contenders for the role of Rose DeWitt Bukater in James Cameron's Titanic, 1997, a part that eventually went to Kate Winslet. While Paltrow has never fully confirmed why she turned it down, she has admitted in interviews that passing on the film was a mistake. At the time, she was already a rising star, and Titanic was considered a risky, over-budget production, not the guaranteed hit it later became. Once released, Titanic became a global phenomenon, earning over $2 billion at the box office and winning 11 Academy Awards, including Best Picture. The film catapulted both Leonardo DiCaprio and Kate Winslet to worldwide fame, and Rose became one of the most iconic female roles in cinematic history. In hindsight, Paltrow has downplayed the regret but acknowledged that saying no to Titanic wasn't her smartest career move. She later won an Oscar for Shakespeare in Love, so her career continued to flourish. Still, missing out on one of the most successful and beloved films of all time remains a significant what-if in her filmography. It's a reminder of how unpredictable Hollywood can be, and how one role can define a career. Robin Williams. Known primarily for his comedic genius and warm-hearted characters, Williams turned down the part because he didn't want to be pigeonholed as a villain or play a character that lacked depth. He preferred roles that allowed him to use his wide range of talents, especially comedy, rather than being cast as a one-dimensional antagonist. The Matrix went on to revolutionize sci-fi cinema with its mind-bending story, groundbreaking visual effects, and intense action sequences. The film launched a hugely successful franchise and made Agent Smith one of the most memorable villains in movie history. Looking back, Robin Williams expressed some regret about turning down the role, recognizing that it could have been a major moment in his career, allowing him to showcase his versatility in a high-profile blockbuster. This decision remains one of Hollywood's notable what-ifs, illustrating how even the most talented actors sometimes pass on roles that later become legendary. Despite missing out on The Matrix, Williams continued to have a celebrated career, but the Agent Smith role stands out as a fascinating near-miss. Michael Keaton's casting as Bruce Wayne/Batman in Tim Burton's Batman, 1989, was initially met with skepticism, not least by Keaton himself. At the time, Keaton was primarily known for his comedic roles in films like Mr. Mom and Beetlejuice. He was concerned that audiences might not accept him as the dark and brooding superhero. The idea of a comedian playing the iconic caped crusader seemed risky, both to the studios and to Keaton personally. Despite his doubts, Keaton accepted the role, and the film became a massive success, revitalizing the superhero genre and establishing a darker, more serious tone for comic book movies. His performance was widely praised, proving his versatility and helping to reshape his career into one that balanced both comedy and drama. The success of Batman and its sequel cemented Keaton's place in Hollywood as a serious actor. Interestingly, years later, when Christopher Nolan's The Dark Knight trilogy came around, Keaton was offered the chance to reprise his role as Bruce Wayne. However, he declined, feeling that Christian Bale had done an excellent job making the character his own. While this later decision wasn't a regret, it's a notable example of an actor turning down a high-profile role after having successfully made it famous. Keaton's journey with Batman remains one of Hollywood's most interesting stories of risk, transformation, and legacy.